take our black asses out of here. Won't you come save us, catch up, and kill all these crackers? Lord, take our black asses out of here. Sing this motherfucker now. Take our black asses out of here. You a bitch, nigga. Take our black asses out of here. Burn your shit down. Come save us, catch up, and kill all these crackers. Take our black asses out of quit hating and get freedom, my nigga.
Y'all already know what it is, man. Your one and only Hebrew Ben Bilal, coming back at you with these Backyard Chronicles. So tell a friend to tell a friend. Hebrew Ben Bilal back at you with these chronicles again, saying what you would love to say, you're just too PC to say it. Good morning, good morning. I just wanted to come on here today and rap at y'all, man. Everybody's been asking me, man, what your next video going to be about? What your next video going to be about? Well, today's topic, as you can see on the screen already, is going to be about segregation. And why I don't have any sympathy or feeling towards the plight of black people. Let me reiterate that. Let me repeat. Segregation and why I don't have any sympathy for black people and their plight, what they go through on a day-to-day basis. Mass incarceration, police brutality, poverty, drugs in your community, all this. I have no, listen, and we will get to that in just a second. But if you haven't liked and subscribed to the channel, man, do so now. Let's get these numbers up. And, let's just, we come on here, we kick it, we just do our thing, man. But before I get into this particular subject, man, I want to give a shout out to this young man, Lamar Dent. Eric Lamar Dent. He embodies everything that the millennial generation should follow, the examples that he sets. He's a hard worker. He's dedicated. He's dedicated to his children. He does everything the right way in regard to caring for them, taking care of them, providing for them. He's a young entrepreneur. He does music. He's recently opened up his own detoxifying water. He calls it, the Wonder Water. It works. And I'm talking about it because I've actually tried it. I'm getting my third gallon here, I think Sunday. But when I was suffering from the flu, he came through, gave me a gallon, made it to the specifications in regard to what I needed, health-wise at that particular time. And it really helped me, man. So, take his information down if you're in Columbus, Georgia. If you do music, that he does music, all his information is there, man. Just wanted to give him a shout out and give him a plug. But without further ado, man, let's get into this topic in regard to segregation and why I don't feel any sympathy for the black community as a whole. Listen, I've already discussed the whole prison system, and if you haven't seen that video, go back in the archives, and I think it's Stop Fighting Mass Incarceration. I believe that's what I called it. So I broke it down in regard to why you shouldn't fight it. They accept the victimization in there. They don't, there's no bucking or defiance in them. And I see socially out here the same exact thing. There's no defiance. There's no bucking. There's no raising up. The most you all to do is march, rally, try to go vote and do all that stuff. But none of that works. If you haven't noticed, things are the same and getting worse generationally. But before I really get into this topic, I want y'all to catch a couple videos, because I put a couple videos up and they're going to explain to you exactly why I feel this particular way. So let's check this one out first.
And Oklahoma is a unique space in terms of the number of African-American towns that were established. Some suggest upwards of 50 African-American towns between 1924 and 1928. Reverend S.S. Jones was going around documenting this sort of self-determined, vibrant African American communities, you see the African American educators, doctors, lawyers, landowners, oil barons, and I think that's what's so remarkable about this footage. To think that individuals, how many years out of slavery, are now owning oil wells that are producing 2,000 barrels a day. Is that not the ultimate American dream? Is that not the ultimate American story? It flies in the face of what I think some people consider part of African American history and culture. I mean, I think that that was one of the things that Oklahoma and what S.S. Jones is really kind of showing is that African American history and culture is not a monolith. And in a way, it became kind of like a marketing tool to encourage individuals to migrate, to move there, that this is a place where you can live, you can thrive, and peacefully reside. There were still palpable racial tensions. There are lynchings, there's Jim Crow, segregation, there's all of these things, and you still have an African American community, or many communities, that really speak to the fortitude and resilience of Black people in this country.
Now, I was going to actually show you the second video, but I don't think it's really a need to do that to kind of convey my message here. When I was incarcerated, most of you know my story, but many of you don't. I was incarcerated for almost 15 years up here in USP Atlanta. I didn't have access to social media. I didn't know what was going on in the outside world, whereas I do now. Now, let me say this: all the blacks that I see on social media, all you do is use this platform to complain about things. You can't get bank loans, discrimination, housing this, housing that. The white man this, the white man that, and all you do is sit around, bemoan your conditions, complain, and beg for help. The reason I don't sympathize with you is because of that video I just showed you. What you have to remember and understand is that these particular individuals that you just seen were former slaves. They were former slaves. These people were coming out of, and understand that Black Wall Street, and most of you know about Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma, they weren't the only ones. There were many, many, many Black communities like this where they were isolated. They were forced to deal with one another. And actually, in one instance, I think it's Tulsa, Oklahoma, the black dollar circulated 19 times before it left out of the community. Why is that important? Because if you just think about today, $1 touching 19 black businesses or 19 different individuals in the community before it left outside the community, that's huge, because now you are really monopolizing the economic structure. You know what I'm saying? Because now the dollars are staying, the economics, the money is staying within your communities. So they have to come in order to get your dollar, because you're not taking it outside of your community. You have everything you need right within your community. You have your dry cleaners, your banks, you have your carpenters, you have your stores, you have everything you need right inside of your community. And that shows that, because if a dollar stays in your community for 19 times, it circulates 19 times before it leaves, that means you have everything inside your community that you need. So, segregation, loved it. Outside of Jim Crow and all those particular laws, segregation was it for us, because if you see those communities, they thrived. They thrived because we were forced to interact with each other. We were forced to deal with each other. Now with this integration, now you went and screamed to massa, yeah, we got ICE over here, boss, but we want yours more. You had your own schools. You heard what the lady said. You had educators. You had doctors. You had black-owned businesses, banks, oil wells, oil barons. You had oil wells and oil fields, man. But you traded all of this in. Actually, what you did was you traded this all in because you wanted to go sit at somebody else's establishment and eat there, instead of allowing your community to continue to thrive. So, understanding that I have no sympathy for the state of blacks today, because you have the ability. Those were ex-slaves, man. Just imagine if you segregated yourself, pulled yourself out of these white communities, and relied on yourself. If you created your own banking systems, and please, I hate getting stuff on my timelines about, oh, the black banks, the white bank won't give us no money, they won't give us loans. Create your own bank. You already have black banks, but you're just not patronizing them. You're not going to them. You actually have them in your communities. They have them then. See, it can work, and it's been proven that it can work. I just showed you that back then, because of segregation, because no one else wanted to deal with them, they had to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they had to make it work. You have the same ability because you have more resources than they had, but you refuse to build on the template or the model that was shown to you. So I don't sympathize with you when you scream about mass incarceration, when you scream about police brutality, when you scream about the state of your neighborhoods and you go march at Washington and oh, this violence and that violence. You have the ability, and it has been proven. I just showed it to you, where they had communities, man, that thrived, where they had their own resources, where they policed themselves. They had their own moralities. They had their own standards of living. Listen, it was great. I mean, I didn't live back then, but that's why I don't empathize and sympathize with blacks. Because all you want to do is sit around and just suck on the tit of this government. And that's what integration has created. It has created a dynamic where you can just sit and rely on others, where you can be shiftless and lazy and be dependent on the government to give you a check every month, where you can suck on the tit of this government and be comfortable and complacent with it. You become so complacent that now you don't want to do anything but complain, cry, like a baby in a crib, man. Until somebody brings you something to eat, you're just going to lay there and cry. You're going to wallow and roll around in your own muck and mire, and you're going to blame everything else for it. Those people had no choice but to interact with each other. They had no choice because nobody else wanted to deal with them. And really, socially today, it's the same way, but y'all just, once again, that integration aspect allows you to go by the white man's ice. I call it the white man's ice syndrome. That's what I call it. Because his wife ice is colder than yours. His bank's money, for some reason, is greener than the black banks. And this is the mindset. This is the mentality that you all share. And that's why I do not care. Just like I talked about the prison system. I said, I don't care that they're laying in that stuff. If they get up and buck and do something about it, it will change, but it has to start inwardly. Just like our communities, you keep marching and rallying and doing this and that. No, the change starts with inside first. Now, I'm not even talking about the person inside the person. The change has to start within the communities. You want the police to stop running in your community, shooting everybody up? Stop calling them into your community. Stop doing it. They are only authorized to come to your house if you allow them. If you call them to your house, they have to have authorization to come to your house. They have to have, they really shouldn't even be coming through your communities because you say, look, we don't need you down here. There's plenty of black communities that they don't go into because they're so fierce. But anyway, I digress on that point. And I also wanted to talk about racism in the Bible. I wanted to talk about racism in the Bible. And I wanted to talk about racism in the Bible because I heard a pastor, a preacher, and something happened. And I think his name's Tony Evans. So he got to talking about racism in the Bible. And he tried to make a point that, see, racism in the Bible, and see, Jesus wasn't racist and he was changing things and all this type of stuff. I don't know. But that's what he is. And I digress on that point. But I want to make sure that I touch on that. But before I do, I'm going to enter into this. I'm going to segue into this particular part by talking about two of the greatest things I've ever seen in history scripturally. And the reason that separatism is a good thing, and it will help you establish yourself as a nation, a nationality, and allow you to flourish. One of the greatest stories, first greatest story I ever read in the Bible was about Abraham and how when he left his father's land, his father's home, when Yahweh called him out, and he went into Canaan, to a place he didn't even know, and he flourished and he thrived. He was blessed. He became wealthier than all the kings around him, to the point where they had to set up a council or a meeting with him, the kings around him, and had to go to him and say, listen, you need to come into some type of arrangement or agreement with us because you're stronger than all of us, that you can come and literally take over. You could literally take over. So please, we got to come into agreement. Now just imagine that, if you will, for just a second. This man was so strong and wealthy that he could actually literally overthrow kings. This was one person. Abraham was just one guy. That he was so wealthy and he had so much that he could actually overthrow a nation. And they had to come to him and come into agreement that he wouldn't do that. Just think about the wealth. See, they made you fall in love with this green thing that's really, that money, that paper money that's really about nothing. Abraham had wealth, meaning a lot of cattle, a lot of livestock, a lot of property. And he had a lot of people that would protect it and keep it for him. So he had basically had his own little militia, and he had his own stuff. And I'm making a point. And if you're not keeping up, just continue to follow, and you'll see the point I'm making. So he was able to keep his own. Now understand, he was segregated. You see, they came to him. He was segregated. He didn't mix and mingle with them. He bought property from them. He bought land from them. He did those things with them. But he wasn't going in town and kicking it. He didn't need that. He had all the resources he needed there. And this was allowed him to flourish because he set the standard. He had rules and morality and all these particular things in place because they were handed down to him from a greater power, a higher power. So now I digress and get into the second greatest story, which will lead me into the point. The second greatest story was when the children of Israel came out of Egypt. Now just think about this. Millions and millions of people making this pilgrimage or this exodus out of this place into a place that they had no idea about. And the reason that I say they had no idea about it because they were captive to the Egyptians. So they were stuck in Egypt for generations. And finally they come out. Now here's what's so important about the story to me. Number one, it's because in order to create these people into a nation, the first thing that Yahweh had to do was liberate them, separate them, get them away from everything that they were comfortable with, everything that they knew. So he had to separate them in order to establish them. So that was the first thing, give them freedom. So he gave them freedom, he set them free. The second thing he did was he took them to the land. He took them to the land because in order to be a nation, you have to have your own land. You have to have your own property. You have to have your own stuff in order to be nationally identified, readily identified. And he did this. So he freed them, he liberated them, he took them to the land, and he started to remove and have them also to remove the inhabitants thereof. So this is just one of the things that I wanted to point out to you. And this particular thing here reminds me so much of us as a people, well, blacks as people. How they cried and they cried and they cried while they were in captivity. And this is exactly what y'all would do. They cried and cried and cried and bemoaned their state when they were in captivity. Oh, we want to be free. They're doing this to us. They were doing that to us. And when he freed them, the first thing they did was when they got out in the wilderness, they cried to go back because they loved sucking on the tit of the government. They were comfortable. They were complacent. Those creature comforts were there for them. And I'm going to read this to you. This is Numbers 11, 4-5. And the mist and the mixed multitude that was amongst them fell a-lusting. And the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. And this is y'all. They were sucking on the tit of the welfare system in Egypt. They were just giving this stuff freely, just like free cheese, milk, all that type of stuff that y'all get here. And they became complacent. Even though they wanted freedom, just like y'all say, you want freedom, but as soon as you get that freedom, you do not know exactly what to do with the freedom. And this was the same case here. They understood what they were going to do with their freedom, but it was that that safety net that they were missing. And this is why it's so profound in my eyes, because they had that safety net. They had the government. So if they were hungry, they were getting fed. They were getting free cheese, getting milk, food stamps, whatever you want to relate it to. This is what they had. And they were being reminded of that. And they was like, man, we want to go back because at least we get to suck on the tit of the government and be comfortable. And this is one of the reasons why you do not want to segregate. You want to stay integrated because it allows you to be a buffoon, ignorant, run around with 1,000 tattoos on your face with your pants sagging. See, if you were held to a different standard, if you were taken and put in the middle of nowhere like they were, you would have to work together. You would have to act like you would have some sense. You would have to listen to someone. You would have to inherit to something. But see, this lack of segregation, this lack of morality, the lack of determination, it all comes with integration. Because see, you have too many options. You have too many options. Whereas if you were forced into a position in a situation where you had to rely on one another, you would, but you're not. So I continue in regard to separation and segregation, because this was the first thing that Yahweh understood. Look, I got to get them out of there, because in order to instill anything, to install anything, they have to be on their own, because this is the only way they're going to listen. This is the only way they're going to understand, because they have to be reliant on me, because I'm their source of strength. I'm their source of power. So once he separated them, he, first thing he did, once again, he removed all the people from them. Segregation. He didn't allow them to mix with them. He didn't allow them to mix with the people that the land he went into. Segregation. So here's the question. Because, once again, just showing you how he separated them here again. But my question is this. With this God of the Bible, because the question was racism in regard to the Bible. So first, the first thing you have to understand is that the standard of racism that we see and know, the institutional racism that we know today, one race being better than another, and that didn't exist back then. So racism in the contemporary sense, the way that we see it today, didn't exist biblically. So you have to scratch that because it didn't exist. There was no such thing as one race being greater than another then. It was all about nationalities. The term racism actually didn't come for quite some time, and we're going to get to that in a second. But you have to understand, for the sake of, I guess for the lack of a better term, right now we're just going to use racism because this is what the conversation was about racism in the Bible. So, these particular passages are very important because, once again, it shows the importance of segregation to the umpteenth degree, because he did not want you intermingling with others. Segregation was very important as far as the installment or the establishing of Israel as a nation, because the only way that they become the nation that David led, that became wealthy under Solomon, was because they separated themselves from everyone. They were self-reliant. The financial structure, it stayed within them. They had their own economic system. They didn't go and just take somebody else's stuff and say, hey, can we borrow money? He said, no, you would be the head and not the tail. So they were the lenders and not the borrowers. So they had the resources. They had the structure. So did you, with Black Wall Street. But now you are the borrower. We understand the Israelites, why you are that way today, but I digress on that point because you wouldn't want to believe it, and you wouldn't believe it anyway. So it was very important to not even intermarry with others, because it was about the establishment of these people, letting them be self-reliant, separated, and strong, because that is how you gain strength. If your rules are the ones that you're following, if your moral code is the one you're following, if you are the one implementing the structures and the orders and the discipline. So racism and separatism in regard to the Bible, let's jump into this. Because what I'm about to tell you, a lot of you are going to say, well, hold up. Because the God of the Bible is the original separatist. He is the original racist because, for the lack of a better term, because racism and separatism is something totally different. You have to understand that. Racism in the contemporary sense means that one nationality, one race is greater than another. That they say the black race, so let's just use the black race. The black race is inferior to the white race. So this is what racism is. Separatism is just being separated from all other people. Now you can have light skin, dark skin, but being separated from all other people, meaning that we don't agree with living amongst y'all because y'all got your own structure. That's not a bad thing within itself. Racism is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's just how this particular country applies racism. Now, how can I say that? First, let's deal with what racism is. Racism is prejudice, discrimination, directly against someone of a different race based upon a belief that one's race is superior. So this is the definition of racism and separatism that I just gave you. And remember what I told you, this is where you would have the first time racism would have been used. So he coined the phrase or the term racism, this guy here, Richard Henry Pratt. But racism, the way that the America's practice it, wasn't birthed with him. The phrase was just coined, but I just wanted to prove my point, make the point that racism, the way that we see it today, was not what was established in the Bible. But for the lack of a better term, we're going to use the same phrase, racism. Now, how can I say that the God of the Bible is the original racist? Exodus chapter 19:5. Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. So he's saying you are going to be above all people. You're going to be better than everybody else. You're going to be financially set. You're going to be established morally. You're going to have your own nation. You're going to have people to protect it. All these particular things. He is the original racist. He's saying that, look, hey, Hebrews, if you do what I tell you to do, you're going to be superior to everyone else. Everybody else is going to be inferior to you. So using the Webster's dictionary definition of racism, the God of the Bible is the original racist. So it's hard to say, oh, he's not a racist. But this is what he's telling these people, that you will be superior. Now, y'all can change the definition of racism if you want to, and I'm fine with that. But as far as the Bible goes, he said that his people will be superior to all other people. So that makes him a racist, or at least a nationalist, because being a Hebrew is not a race. We're a nation of people. We're a nation. We're not a race. We're a nation. So, but once again, using that particular term, that word, for the lack of a better word, or lack of a better word, this is what he is. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord your God. The Lord thy God has chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. So the term racism. So when this pastor was teaching or attempting to teach that, oh, God is not a racist and he can't stand racism. Yes, he's a big racist. There it is right there. In accordance to y'all definition, he's a racist. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. And the Lord thy God has chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself above all nations that are upon the earth. See, this is what I love. And this is what I suggest. I suggest that you Christians just leave the Bible alone. Because you try to make, and the passage that he took was the woman at the well, the Canaanite woman that he met, and how God was abolishing the racist mindset with that whole particular thing, that Jesus and the Canaanite woman and so on and so forth. It was the stupidest narrative I ever heard, but they say stupid stuff all the time. But in this book here, he's a racist. Because he's telling you, hey, look, you are going to be better than everybody else. And the Lord hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he has promised you, and that you should keep all his commandments. and to make thee a high nation above all nations which he has made, in praise and in name and in honor. So you're going to be better than everybody else in regard to everything. And that you mayest be a holy people unto the Lord thy God, as he has spoken. Listen, man, racism exists. He's the original racist. I just wanted to close the door on that because, once again, I heard this guy speaking on that, and I said, man, this is just pure folly. He tells the people that if you follow me and do exactly what I tell you, you're going to be better than everybody on earth. So if we take the term racism, we connect it to the scriptures, that's exactly what it is. It's racism. And he's the original racist, and he's the original separatist. Because I showed you when he brought Abraham out and when he brought the Hebrews out, he told them, don't mix with them, don't marry anybody else. This is your people. This is who you deal with. And this is how you create a financial stability, that strength. And this is why I say separatism was the greatest thing. I'm not talking about Jim Crow. I'm talking about separatism was the greatest thing that we had going for us. But when we wanted to beg the master to go sit at his kitchen table and buy his ice, this is what happened to you. So now you're suffering, and please don't, these are residual effects of slavery. No, it's not. It's because you all want to integrate and you want to be a part of other things instead of supporting, separating, and, applying yourself. They separate themselves from you all the time. I'm sure you all got them upscale neighborhoods where if you go up there, they're gonna look at you crazy. That's separation. They separate themselves from you all the time. But you won't separate yourselves because then it's reverse racism and, oh no, that's wrong. Anyway, man, I digress. I just wanted to hit on this topic today, man, because like I say, I had been thinking about it, looking at social media, watching all the crying and complaining about your state. Stop crying. If you're not ready to do something about it, stop crying. You can do something about it. I showed you that former slaves done something about their situation because they understood that they had to. They had no other choice but to get in there, deal with each other, deal with themselves. So please, miss me with all the crying and complaining until you're ready to put boots on the ground, rebuild your communities. Y'all millionaires. Y'all have so much going on for you. You have the financial structure. You have the financial foundation. You have everything you need at your disposal. You refuse to use it because you love sucking on the tit of this government. So stop complaining and just keep suckling. Just keep suckling. So I digress. And once again, Hebron ben Bilal coming back at you. Backyard Chronicles, giving wisdom to the wise. And if you don't know how to think, I just gave you an opinion. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the channel yet, do so, man, because we kick it here. I love y'all, man. And until next time, shalom.